Hello, everyone. Welcome to Spirit Matters. We're coming to you on Channel 9 and also on Joppa Radio, WJOPLP Newburyport, FM 96.3, with a new episode the second Saturday of every month. Each month on Spirit Matters, we'll either respond to listener submitted questions or focus on a special discussion topic. Some weeks we'll have a guest respondent as well, as we do today for our special topic of poetry. I'm your co-host, Mary Jacobson. Let me begin by welcoming my esteemed co-host, Reverend Rebecca Bryan. Good morning.
Good morning, Mary. Great to see you. Good to be here.
It's good to see you too. And let me introduce you to and welcome now our special guest for today. The Reverend Dr. Jared Mercer is here. He's the new priest at St. Paul's Episcopal Church on High Street in Newburyport. Before moving to Newburyport last June, he was living in the United Kingdom for 11 years, where he was most recently a chaplain and a faculty member in the Department of Theology and Religion at the University of Oxford, where he taught early Christian history and thought. He's the author of several books. One is Divine Perfection and Human Potentiality, a book on the 4th century saint, Hilary of Poitiers. And he's the editor and co-author of the books Catechesis, An Invitation to Living Faith, and another one with a terrific title, Love Makes No Sense, An Invitation to Christian Theology. He has an abiding love, and he promises that some might call it even an obsession with poetry. So we're lucky to have him here on Poetry Day. Welcome, Jared, and thank you so much for coming to visit us on Spirit Matters.
Of course, yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you here. Well, we're going to begin, as has become our tradition, with revisiting the quotation for reflection that Reverend Rebecca provided us with on last month's show, which was from Reinhold Niebuhr. And that was, we are saved by the final form of love, which is forgiveness. Reverend Rebecca, any additional thoughts on that quotation?
You know, it's one of the reasons I love that quotation, Mary, is because it really, for me anyway, in my experience with others, is makes us stop and think, like, really? Is that true? And yet, as we sit with it, I have to always ask, is anyone ever free, truly, right? Without that. And I think there's a common misconception that if we forgive, that means we've accepted behavior. We've let something be okay, when in fact, what it does is frees us to take the actions we need to take in the world. Yeah. So forgiving acts, forgiving things that are, forgiving the people that perform acts that we don't agree with, really frees us up to do the work we're called to do in the world. So yeah.
As I reflected upon it, and Gerald, we'll get you to chime in on this too. But the part of it that caught my attention was the final form of love, which made me think about finality and endings and death, or preparing for death, or to say some kind of ultimate farewell. And that the final form of love then is forgiveness, made me think about just what you were saying about a kind of a liberation that can come when, to be fully free to move on or to say goodbye, you need to be unburdened of resentments or blame or whatever it is. And at those ultimate moments, you might be forgiving God or nature or the reason why things are the way they are, the reason you're dying or somebody else is dying. And that made me think of one of my favorite phrases from the Bible. And not that I know the Bible that well, mind you, but I love the phrase, the peace that passeth all understanding. And by the way, try saying that quickly. but it struck me that, and I love that phrase just because it evokes a mystery, and I do love a good mystery. The character in a passage in you once said that she hates muddles, but she loves a good mystery. And so
that's great.
That passeth all understanding is a mystery, and yet I like it. It makes me feel this frisson of kind of like intrigue and peace at the same time. So it made me feel like maybe I'd never thought of that way. And the quotations you leave us with always wind up taking me to places I hadn't anticipated, that maybe the passage to, again, slowly, the peace that passeth all understanding is ultimately forgiveness. I just never thought about that before. Jared, any thoughts as you hear this quotation?
Yeah. It's a beautiful quotation. I mean, what came to my mind too in this sort of final form of love, we're talking about finality. of love. We can talk about it as ending, as in, you know, time, like, yeah, as you say, or the end or the aim, as if
Ah,
forgiveness is this sort of like perfect form that we're aiming for when we're loving,
yeah.
you know, and this and I, you know, think I have um a friend of mine who's a priest. He sort of was a mentor to me, you know, when I was ordained. Always says that there's no because in love, you know. You don't love someone because they're funny, or because they're, you know, you enjoy being with them, or because anything about who they are, but just simply as they exist, you know. And so this is a genuine sort of love. And if we think about that with forgiveness, it's, you know, if we're not loving because, if there's no because of love, then when people harm us, even, you know, we're not loving them because they're perfect, or because they never do harm us, or, you know. So
Yeah.
this idea that love is so big that it has to even meet that place of personal injury, you know, is a bold sort of way of looking at love. I mean, I think that shade of forgiveness makes us see how grand love is, you know.
And I would say also that we'd add ourselves to that list,
Mhm.
right,
Mm.
of forgiveness. At people's, the bedside of people dying, that's what I've experienced the most, is resentments, and often mostly at their selves.
Yeah.
And so the forgiveness also is for ourselves, especially
Mhm.
at the end of the
Yeah.
time that we're.
Yeah.
So.
Well, wow, that was see how far you can go on a single quotation when you consider it carefully. Well, thank you both for that. That was really wonderful, and more to reflect on. Well, let's dig in today's special topic, poetry, and also its deep and powerful links to spirituality. Anne Lamott, the author Anne Lamott, has famously said that the essence of prayer can be summed up as three things: help, thanks, and wow. And she said that poetry is the official palace language of wow. So, so let's dig in. We've all brought some poems that we like a lot, and believe me, I think each of us had a really hard time deciding, but we did. So we wintered it down. So these are the super special ones that made the first cut. So, Reverend Rebecca, maybe you'd be willing to start us off with the first of the poems that you brought.
Absolutely. So, and yes, you know, I think poetry is deeply linked to spirituality for many, many, many of us. And so thank you for letting us enjoy this topic today. This first poem I'm going to share is without a doubt for me the most important piece of poetry and connection to my honestly, in many ways, expression of some of my most important concepts of theology, which are around love and relationship, and what some people could see as the polarities, but you know, the need of both, and both the deepest, most difficult and the most joyful. And I love how it's summed up. So I'll read it to you now.
Okay.
Kindness by Naomi Shihab Nye. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment, like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go, so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you, how he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness is the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and send you into the day to mail letters and purchase bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, it is I you've been looking for, and then goes with you everywhere, like a shadow or a friend.
I love that last line, like a shadow or a friend. Jared, do you have a comment or a question about the poem?
Yeah, I love how the use of the language of loss, is so tied to kindness for her, and I think, and grief is always, I think, such an impetus for poetry. I mean, it's such an impetus for life. I mean,
Yeah.
and recognizing that, like she says, waking with the sorrow, right, enables us to live into that kindness. And so it's a very rich way of looking at it. I guess I'd ask that, what drew you to this poem in particular, to deal with that sort of sense? What about kindness, helps you wrestle with that notion of grief or loss?
I think that's a great question. For me, it is where I experience the truest, most genuine in the world is when people are stripped, right, of the pretenses, when they're in their most vulnerable humanity. And so I think of the time when I was a chaplain in the hospital, and there is a way we can receive and appreciate kindness, the smallest things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Someone
Yeah.
pausing, looking in your eyes, asking how you are, picking up your at the end of your street, when we're in the place of no pretense, when we're in that place of humanity and genuine need, and grief and loss is need. And so I think for me, also having lived through all of that, as all humans do, I learned a long time ago that I could choose not to feel difficult feelings or to feel them less, but it also meant that I tamped down all my other feelings. And so I choose joy, but that means I also choose sorrow. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the poetry makes clear that there's a strong, even causative link between sorrow and kindness. It makes me think about the Dalai Lama is often quoted as saying that his religion is kindness. So, well, Jared, would you be willing to share your first poem with us?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I've got here a poem by Kai Miller from this beautiful book, There is an Anger That Moves. And Kai Miller is an immigrant to Britain from Jamaica. And he writes a lot about his life as an immigrant and the sort of clash of cultures that he lives with. And this is a poem from a series. There's different sections of the poem, all called The Broken, and this is The Broken 2 is the section, and it's number 6. Broken is the shape of everything, like yesterday, like memory. Now is so large. The present is everywhere. We break them into pieces, and they are all we have. They are all we carry into tomorrow. Broken bits. It is the shape of everything. Like our anointing, an alabaster jar is broken, that each step into Jerusalem would be fragrant, that our crudest signatures, stamped into mud, might have rising from them a year's wages worth of scent. Though our spirits would be shattered, though our backs and our bones would be rubble. Broken is the shape and shade of everything. Like our patched up dreams that were whole, now we hold on simply to its largest remnant. We squeeze so tight our hands bleed. The holding of every dream is a crucifixion. And broken is the final shape of everyone. It is the only way we could become who we are, by breaking out of, into. Consider now the evidence. Scattered shells, halves of cocoons, doors torn from their hinges, windows flung and cracked against the stump of trees, walls like centuries discarded. Consider the dust that was once skin. Consider the cotton we outgrew. Consider shoes and their eventual mouths. But still we stand with ruined feet in this world of splinters, our skin scraped raw by our emerging. We have been bruised into ourselves.
That poem certainly ends strong. We have been bruised into ourselves, and
Yeah.
the thoughts about the brokenness and the shards that perennially are everything, and it tying it in with the crucifixion. That's a very, very powerful poem.
It is, yeah.
Thank you so much for reading that. Gosh, there's a world in that one poem. You know, I think by design there is the world, our world, both the tangible, objective world and the spiritual world in that one poem. Reverend Rebecca, did you have a comment or a question for Jared?
Well, thank you, Jared. That was profound and powerful. I had not heard that before. I'll get that book. So, well, I was very taken by this concept of brokenness everywhere. I mean, and in all of us, which is, again, so opposite of what we're taught, right? We're taught that perfection is what we're striving for. I'll ask you the same question you asked me. What drew you to that poem? Why is that one of your most favorite?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true, right? On a level that's inexpressible, on a level of mystery, and not necessarily on a sort of level of some sort of, you know, factual knowledge, but a deeper truth. And so I think we all, the reason why we talk about it being so profound is because we know it's deeply true, even if we can't typically express it in other ways outside of poetry. And I think that's another reason why I wanted to choose it, because I think poetry stretches our language to its limits and enables the mystery of who we are and the mystery of the world to have a framework of expression, which we could otherwise not do it. I mean, think about someone in their grief or loss, someone you know, wrestling with that brokenness, and you going to them and just literally saying, "Oh yes, but our brokenness makes us." So see, how this is shaping you or something. What a horrible, thing to just say to someone in the midst of their grief, right? It's a kind of truth that does not make sense in our literal reality. That's the kind of truth that if someone said it to you, you would probably have words for them and not speak to them for a long time. But if you enter into this poem, it can reorient our brokenness in a way that normal life, can't. And that normal life disables us from being attentive and being attuned to this way of being in the world, but poetry enables it to happen. And that's something about it stretching our imaginations, stretching out who we are, and enabling us to have new ways of knowing and new ways of existing in the world that otherwise, I think, couldn't exist. And so I think that's something that the poem does for me, which is representative of all poetry. And in the way that you talked about, it doesn't make sort of sense in our life. It's countercultural, right? We want, flourishing and success and, production and, whatever. And that's another thing I think that poetry constantly does, is that it's a humble protest to our sort of consumerist, way of living in the world. And it's the uselessness of poetry is why we need it so much. Because in our utilitarian world, everything has value because it's useful and it does something for us and it brings us to some sort of success or it produces something. And poetry is useless to that. I mean, it's the way I think the novel is so important for us as well. Like, it's other types of literature, are great too, but we might go to them, to help us with something or to produce something or give us something. But just to enter into the world of a narrative fiction or enter into the world of a poem, especially, stretches us into new ways of being that clash with our everyday, and we need that,
So beautifully put. Thank you. Yeah. Wow. Mary, how about you?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think they clash in a way that takes us to a new place, and we need new places. And that's where creativity comes from.
Yes.
Well, I've selected a poem by Brad Aaron Maudlin, and it's called What You Missed That Day You Were Absent from Fourth Grade. Mrs. Nelson explained how to stand still and listen to the wind, how to find meaning in pumping gas, how peeling potatoes can be a form of prayer. She took questions. She took questions on how not to feel lost in the dark. After lunch, she distributed worksheets that covered the ways to remember your grandfather's voice. Then the class discussed falling asleep without feeling you had forgotten to do something else, something important, and how to believe the house you wake up in is your home. This prompted Mrs. Nelson to draw a chalkboard diagram detailing how to chant the Psalms during cigarette breaks and how not to squirm for sound when your own thoughts are all you hear. Also, that you have enough. You have enough. The English lesson was that I am, is a complete sentence. And just before the afternoon bell, she made the math equation look easy, the one that proves that hundreds of questions and feeling cold, and all those nights spent looking for whatever it was you lost, and one person add up to something, add up to something. So that's Mrs. Nelson's class. Would have been a very special. I would not have missed a day. Yeah.
Well, that, I'll be honest, I had not heard that either. And it really moved me. And I think, for me, Mary, I found myself thinking, but that we could actually teach our children that. Can you imagine the world where children were taught those things? So tell us how you first were introduced to this poem and why it means so much to you.
I don't remember where I first stumbled across it, but I immediately loved it because of the juxtaposition of things from fourth grade, like a diagram and going to the chalkboard, and that's part of, I think, what makes the poem work, that it's this mix of Mrs. Nelson, and I pictured my third grade teacher, Mrs. Newton, who was a force. And so you have the setup of these kind of everyday things. Children do not talk about these things, but children are experiencing. The child in us and the adult in us are trying to remember our grandfather's voice, trying to feel enough, yes. Like I am is a sentence. And all this stuff is going on beneath the surface, and we rarely talk about them in school or anywhere else. And so that's part of what charmed and intrigued me about the poem, this juxtaposition of what never happened in fourth grade. But it's also an appealing kind of fantasy to picture this guru, fourth grade teacher, actually teaching things that are enchanting and that delve into the mystery of being. And so that was what immediately drew me to it. And I just, because, and I think in a way, both of the poems that you were reading reference in a way, especially the one you were reading in your discussion of it, Jared, this kind of, we are thinking about loss and grief and the things we're striving for, the things that our ego feels like we need. We run around looking for them, but what we really yearn for is how to feel at home in the world. Because that's what she's the world we live in is our home, and how to make it feel like home, how to remember, how to find meaning, and that our loves add up to something. So in this one poem that is kind of charming and almost funny in some ways, has a universe within it too. Yeah. So that was what drew me to it. Love it.
Yeah, I love the poem. It's one of my favorite poems as well. And I think the line that she taught us how to chant the Psalms during cigarette breaks. Yes. It's just one of the best, in all of contemporary poetry. I mean, it's just fantastic. And I've loved this poem for a while as well. And I think you're right. It's that It's this idea of breaking open the everyday, the most everyday, the ridiculously everyday, right? I mean, chanting a cigarette breaks, I mean, into this overwhelming sense of the deepest of human need and desire,
Right.
So yeah, it's really beautiful.
And the need to transform pumping gas into a kind of prayer,
Yeah.
which we also all need.
Yeah.
Well, Reverend Rebecca, I think we circled back to you for your second poem.
Sure. Yes. Okay. What fun this is. So this poem is by Mary Oliver. And this was the reading that I chose actually for my installation here at First Religious Society. So this is deeply meaningful to me and to my ministry, and it's entitled Don't Hesitate. If you suddenly and unexpectedly feel joy, don't hesitate. Give into it. There are plenty of lives and whole towns destroyed or about to be. We are not wise and not very often kind, and much can never be redeemed. Still, life has some possibility left. Perhaps this is its way of fighting back, that sometimes something happens better than all the riches or power in the world. It could be anything, but very likely you notice it in the instant when love begins. Anyway, that's often the case. Anyway, whatever it is, don't be afraid of its plenty. Joy is not made to be a crumb.
All these poems end strong. It's not meant to be a crumb. I really love that line. Yeah, Mary Oliver always knows what she's doing.
Yeah, she does. And I mean, there's this sense of it. I mean, a lot of times poetry, I think, if it becomes too on the nose and definitely like too preachy or something, like it's just a bit like, it doesn't work. Mary Oliver is someone who sometimes is very on the nose, sometimes is a bit preachy, but it always works, and it's always enriching. And you're like, you're not supposed to be able to do that. Like that's supposed to be, gauche or something, in poetry. But it's just rich. It's always, it's just rich. And and she has an amazing way of doing this.
She has a way of touching those places of absolute recognition in us. So, oh, I thought that. Oh, I felt that. I've never talked about it with anybody, and I've never heard anybody describe it so that I understood it better. But there it is. She's absolute master of that. And this, what you read, and I had not encountered this Mary Oliver. It's kind of written it almost in prose. I had not encountered it before, so thank you for that. Great pleasure. Discovery, just great. Do you want to say something about what drew you to it?
I love that. I love the opening and the closing. If you suddenly and unexpectedly feel joy, don't hesitate.
Yeah.
Joy is not made to be a crumb.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's beautiful. And knowing her and her, I mean, I don't mean personally, but knowing her and her story and her life, and for me, makes her poetry all the more meaningful and rich. So yes, and I love what you said, Jared. I have a friend who says, every time someone says Mary Oliver, I think, oh, another Mary Oliver. And then I think, darn, every time she does it.
It's like, you start reading that poem, you're like, oh, come on, don't tell me. It doesn't have to tell me what to feel in a poem, but then you're like, please tell me again. So by the end of it, it's like, I don't care, like, what you're supposed to do. Keep doing it.
It's magic.
Very funny.
Okay, Jared, how about your second poem?
Yeah, sure. So the second one I wanted to do is by the poet Spencer Reese. He's a brilliant poet. He also happens to be an Episcopal priest as well. But he writes very little. He has a couple of collections, sort of like 10 or 12 years apart or something. I think he just came out with a new prose book as well. But he wasn't a priest when this book was written. It's called The Clerk's Tale. But this poem is called Tonight. Tonight. You are being born. Feels good. Something enormous kisses you. Its eye surveys your revolutions. Relaxed in your new nudity, you work your labyrinthine ears, those perfect disciples, registering all that hums, ticks. Oh, you encyclopedia, you do not know what I know. How blank the cold grow. But let the addendums come later. I listen to the dust from the city gather on the necks of the saints. At the hospital's exits, I exit. And so I say to you, yes, you. Everyone's a fugitive. Everyone.
Mm. Yes, we are.
Yeah.
You know, another strong ending. Yeah.
Mhm.
Wow, that's also powerful, Jared. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, I love this whole collection. He's just absolutely brilliant, but this poem in particular, and just this, there's this playfulness, you know, throughout, oh, you encyclopedia, you know, and
Yeah.
this baby, you know, relaxed and nudity, you know, you're being born, feels good, you know,
Yeah.
but then ending in this way in which you would expect it to be, you know, I don't know, everyone is, you know, you're telling this baby everyone is, you know, searching, or everyone is, you know, even lost or something, you know,
Yeah.
in the
Brilliant.
world, but fugitive, you know, everyone
Yes.
Yeah.
Love that.
running.
Yeah.
Um, mm,
Right.
Mm.
Yeah, because and fugitive has a lot of associations with it, both running from anything, running from the law, running from a, you know, it has so many meanings to it. So
mm,
it's very powerful. Thank you for that.
mm.
Jared.
So did you have any questions or comments about it, Reverend Rebecca?
I loved, again, we're on this ending thing, but I loved that surprise ending. I mean, it literally, it was a shocker in a great way and leaves me really thinking, which is fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, all right. For my second and final poem, I'm going to read a poem by the great Marie Howe. It's called "What the Living Do." Johnny, Johnny, the kitchen sink has been clogged for days. Some utensil probably fell down there, and the Drano won't work but smells dangerous. And the crusty dishes have piled up, waiting for the plumber I still haven't called. This is the everyday we spoke of. It's winter again. The sky's a deep, headstrong blue, and the sunlight pours through the open living room windows because the heat's on too high and I can't turn it off. For weeks now, driving or dropping a bag of groceries in the street, the bag breaking, I've been thinking, this is what the living do. And yesterday, hurrying along those wobbly bricks in the Cambridge sidewalk, spilling my coffee down my wrist and sleeve, I thought it again and again later when buying a hairbrush. This is it. Parking, slamming the car door shut in the cold. What you called that yearning. When you finally gave up, we want the spring to come and the winter to pass. We want whoever to call or not call, a letter, a kiss. We want more and more of it and then more of it. But there are moments walking when I catch a glimpse of myself in the window glass, say the window of the corner video store, and I'm gripped. I am gripped by a cherishing so deep for my own blowing hair, chapped face, an unbuttoned coat, and I am speechless. I am living. I am living. I remember you. I remember you. Thank you, Marie Howe. So,
Wow.
and
Mary.
you know, I will admit that partly I was drawn to this. I mean, almost all poems, as you were commenting, have to do with grief and loss at some level. Because what is the greatest mystery? Greater mystery, there may be some, than the sudden total absence of something that was previously animate in our presence. And my dear departed 15-year-old Labrador Retriever Paris Sweet Pea died a couple of weeks ago. And so this poem came to me. To me, it's a reminder of you have to be willing to remember, because that's part of mourning and it opens you to grief. And you'll never be finished grieving if you don't start. But some of that and some of what to me the poem means is that you have to recognize your own continuing, ongoing living,
Yes.
and that joy is not a crumb, as Mary Oliver would say, and that with that recognition that you are living and you don't run from it, the everydayness of our life often is a great flight from what we need to be working on, what we need to be feeling, and that to me comes through in the poem. And then that kind of that moment, that powerful moment that she built, the poem builds to that moment of cherishing
Yes.
the accidental reflection
Yes.
of herself. And, you know, the chapped face, the open coat, these are so evocative. And yet they bring her to a place of recognizing that she is still living and that she, in her own way, cherishes even the ability to remember is something the living do. So that's what drew me to this poem. And I you know, I dedicate it to my dear lost pet.
Yeah. Oh, Mary, I'm so sorry to hear about that. As you know, we share loves of animals and dogs. And it reminded me too, listening to you, both when you were reading it and in your reflections, and its meaning for you is how every time something happens, right, in my life, I guess I can only speak to, when someone dies or when we have a near escape of something, that would have changed things permanently, I think I'll never forget. I will always hold this
Yes.
deep, deep gratitude and awakeness and appreciation. And then I forget.
Yeah.
And awaken
It's
again.
true.
So
Yeah.
Mm.
Absolutely. Yeah. So
Thank you for that.
And anyway, speaking back to the value and the power of poetry, because I mean, honestly, life is very mysterious. It's quite befuddling most of the time, and so is death and grief and loss. And thank God, and you kind of referenced this earlier, Jared. Thank God for poetry, because I know that sometimes in a poem like this one from Marie, how like all the ones we've read, you'll find some piece of what we're struggling with.
Yes.
And it can create that moment of recognition and clarity that it doesn't necessarily end the mystery, but it enables us to feel like we penetrated it a wee bit.
Yes.
And a wee bit is good.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people struggle with poetry. You hear all the time, I don't really get poetry, or I can't mix,
yeah.
whatever. And I think it's because we just have to recognize it is a different type of knowledge, right? And it's a different type of, we enter into a poem. We don't it's not a riddle, a puzzle, find the hidden meaning, or whatever, right? Which I think is sometimes maybe in school growing up, or, something we're taught to sort of decipher the meaning of a poem
that's
or
right.
riddle or whatever. And we're obsessed, in our culture with this singular type of empirical knowledge, I know this, sort of desk is wood, right? And that's what knowing means,
Yeah, that's right.
But love doesn't work like that. Beauty doesn't work. Awe and wonder and grief and loss. That's not how we approach them, or make sense of them, or make sense of ourselves within them. And there's something about, again, poem, it's not this puzzle, right? And it's more about, rather than making sense of the poem, it's more about making our sense of ourselves, within the poem when we enter into it, right? And we can't necessarily put our finger on that. Like, you can't put your finger on how this poem touches your grief, right?
Yeah.
And you can't make sense of it, but it makes sense of you in some way,
Yes.
Yes.
And it's interesting, as you say that, Jared, that poetry uses language to evoke something that you can't put in words, which is another mystery. So anyway, and Mrs. Nelson would never send kids to find the hidden meaning of the poem and tell them what the right interpretation of the wrong one was. But I'm sure that she would guide you to Mary Oliver. So, well, that draws us to the end of our section on poetry. But Reverend Rebecca, I'm confident that you probably have a quotation for us to reflect upon before the next Spirit Matters.
I do.
I knew you would.
It's a little longer today, and yet it's so apropos for everything we're saying. And taken again from Naomi Shihab Nye, she says this: poetry calls us to pause. Poetry calls us to pause. There's so much we overlook while the abundance around us continues to shimmer on its own.
Oh, another strong ending, to shimmer on its own. Oh, all right. Okay, that'll be fun. We'll revisit that then
Yes.
at the beginning of the next Spirit Matters.
We will.
So, usually I end with a positive or a hopeful story, often about somebody who has done something that shimmers in a positive and hopeful way. But I want to do something a little bit different today in honor of our special theme of poetry. I want to end with a poem, prayer, blessing from Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. And part of the reason I choose to do that is we live in such turbulent times. March 7th was the anniversary of Bloody Sunday at the Pettus Bridge in Selma. And March 8th is International Women's Days. Both of those markers can remind us of the progress we've made, yay, but they also remind us that there's always a pushback and there's always more to do. So I want to end with this because it has to do with how we go about continuing to make progress. The secret is within. Well, you get a sense. Let me share this with you. It's not very long. We give thanks for places of simplicity and peace. May we find such places in ourselves. We give thanks for places of freedom and beauty. May we find such places in ourselves. We give thanks for places of refuge and love. May we find such places in ourselves. May we begin to mend the outer world according to the truth of our inner life.
Mm.
We are the transformers, is what that says to me.
Mm.
And the progress that remains in front of us is something that happens when we find those places inside ourselves and we become the mending ourselves that marches outward, ripples outward from us into the world. So that's why I wanted to end on that note on this day, which is resonant with some of the progress we've made and some of which we haven't. And also it's a poem, and that's our special theme. So let me end it. Jared, thank you. Oh my goodness.
Thank you.
You
Thank you,
brought
Mary.
such beautiful poems and such beautiful reflections upon them. We may have to do poetry part 2, and I surely hope you're
Right.
pre-booked for that.
Yeah. Be great. Yeah.
we may also, you're going to have to, I think, at some point come back and talk about Love Makes No Sense.
Sure. Yeah.
That is a great title. And I know
It
it's
is.
in Christian theology, but that also is intriguing. So thank you, Jared. It's been an honor and a blessing to have you on Spirit
Yes.
Matters today. I really
Thanks so much to
appreciate it.
both of you. Yeah.
Yes,
It's been a
thank you,
blessing for
Jared.
me.
Yes.
And Reverend Rebecca, thank you. Always good to see you.
Always great to see you,
and
Mary.
we'll reflect upon your quotation and the shimmering of it all and revisit that next time. So that's it for today, everybody. Please join us for our next new episode on the second Saturday of April. That'll be April 10th. And just imagine it'll be full on spring by then. And that'll be welcome, I think, for us all. Your questions or suggestions for discussion topics are welcome. Please email them to spiritmattersnewburyport@gmail.com. Once again, that's spiritmattersnewburyport, all run together, @gmail.com. Your name can be kept confidential if you prefer. After broadcast, Spirit Matters will replay on Channel 8 at 1 p.m. on Mondays and again on Wednesdays at 9 p.m. It'll also be available on Port Media's YouTube channel. Go to www.ncmhub.org and click on the YouTube icon, then look for the playlist for Spirit Matters and you'll find it. You'll also find it on the SoundCloud as a podcast. Similarly, go to ncmhub.org and click on the cloud icon and scroll down until you find Spirit Matters. Have a wonderful month, everybody. We'll see you in spring.
Sounds great.
Bye-bye. Thanks again,
everyone.
Reverend Rebecca.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jared. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.